The whip cracked before Finn Brooks even realized his own mouth had come open. 5 silver stags for the orc bitch, Lord Corvin Ashby called from beneath his striped canopy, and the crowd in Thornwell's market square laughed the way crowds do when they are glad the cruelty is happening to someone else. Up on the auction block, chained wrist to wrist, stood the largest woman Finn had ever seen and the most furious. Green-gray skin gleamed with sweat under the midday sun, tusks pressing against her lower lip as she strained against the iron. And when the steward's whip found her shoulder a second time for spitting at Lord Ashby's boots, she did not cry out. She only turned her head and looked at the man holding the lash with such contempt that he flinched first. 6, Finn heard himself shout. Every head in the square turned. His own father, 3 rows back beside a wagon of Thornwell trade goods, went the color of old parchment. "Finn," Bram Brooks hissed. "Finn, what in the 7 hells are you doing?" Finn did not entirely know. He was a stonemason, not a slaver, not a lord, not even a particularly rich man. His purse held the coin he'd spent 2 years saving toward a plot of land near the eastern wall, where he meant to raise his own house stone by stone the way he raised the town's walls and wells. He had come to the square that morning only to buy nails from the smith's stall, and instead he had stumbled into Lord Vane's war prize auction, held after the border skirmish against the Ironback Clan hold in the Greymantle foothills. He had meant to walk past it, the way decent men walked past things that turned their stomachs, but the whip had cracked, and the orc woman had not begged, and something in Finn's chest had simply refused to let that stand. 7, Ashby drawled, unbothered, amused even, the way a cat is amused by a mouse that dares to hiss. 8, Finn said, and his voice did not shake though his hands did. The steward, a narrow man named Combe with ink-stained fingers, glanced toward Lord Vane's dais for guidance. Lord Alderic Vane, who governed Thornwell from the grey keep that loomed behind the square, waved a ringed hand in bored permission. War prizes were war prizes. Coin was coin, whoever paid it. "She is a master smith," Combe announced to the crowd, more to justify the rising price than to inform it. "Captured with the Ironback raiding party at Fen Hollow Crossing. Her blades fetch 3 times the going rate in Caldron's Reach. Whoever wins her wins a forge worth a small fortune." Ashby's smile thinned. He had wanted her for his own armory, to chain her over a forge in his keep and let her make him rich. He looked at Finn, a stonemason in a dusty work tunic, hands cracked and gray with lime dust, hardly worth noticing, and something proud and cruel decided he would not be outbid by such a man. 10 stags, Ashby said. The square murmured. 10 stags was more than most men in Thornwell saw in a year. Finn's fingers closed around the small leather purse at his belt. His land money, his 2 years of chisel work and wall raising and well digging, every coin he had scraped together to finally stop being the merchant's disappointing son and become something of his own. Up on the block, the orc woman's dark eyes had found him. She was not looking at him with gratitude. She was looking at him the way a woman looks at a fool who has wandered into a fight far beyond his weight, assessing, incredulous, almost insulted on his behalf. Finn looked back at her anyway. 15, he said. The crowd gasped. His father made a strangled sound. Lord Ashby's smile vanished entirely, replaced by something colder, and for one endless breath Finn thought the man might simply take her by force and be done with the bidding altogether. But Lord Vane, sensing sport and profit both, leaned forward on his dais with sudden interest. 15 stags from the stonemason's boy, Vane called out, clearly delighted. "Corvin, will you let a common mason best you in your own square?" Ashby's jaw worked. 15 stags was more than he had planned to spend on a slave he could simply take through other means later, and pride was a coin he preferred to spend on things worth keeping. "Take her, Mason," he said at last, with a contempt that was meant to wound. "Enjoy scraping the soot from your good name." The steward's gavel, a stonemason's mallet borrowed for the occasion, absurdly struck the block. "Sold, to Finn Brooks, son of Bram Brooks, for 15 silver stags." The crowd's murmur rose into something between a laugh and a cheer, the particular cruelty of townsfolk delighted by spectacle. Finn walked forward on legs that did not feel entirely his own, counting coin into Comb's ink-stained palm, aware of his father's stricken face, aware of Lord Ashby's stare boring into the back of his neck, aware most of all of the woman on the block whose chains were finally being struck free of the iron ring. She did not thank him. She stepped down from the block and stood before him, a full head taller, her shoulders broad enough to fill a doorway, wearing a sleeveless leather jerkin laced tight over a powerful chest, cracked and soot-stained from some forge she had not seen in weeks, and leather trousers tucked into boots worn soft with travel. Even in chains, even sold like grain at a market, she carried herself like something that had never once considered itself owned. "You," she said, her voice a low rasp of a woman who had spent a lifetime shouting over Hammerfall, "are either very brave or very stupid." "I've been told both," Finn admitted, and found absurdly that his heart was hammering harder than it had during the bidding. Her dark eyes narrowed, studying him, the dust on his hands, the plain wool of his tunic, the total absence of any noble bearing. "You spent everything," she said. "It was not a question." "Yes." "Why?" Finn thought of the whip crack, of the way she had refused to make a sound. "Didn't seem right," he said simply, watching it. Something shifted behind her eyes, not gratitude, not yet, but a kind of recalculation, as though she had expected one answer and received a different one entirely. The steward cleared his throat, impatient to move the auction along, and thrust a coiled length of chain toward Finn. "You'll want this for the walk home, unless you fancy chasing her through 3 streets." Finn looked at the chain, and then at the woman, and did something that made the crowd murmur again. He did not take it. "I don't need it," he said. "Do I?" The orc woman's brows rose, surprise flickering openly across her face for the first time. Then, slowly, deliberately, she reached into a hidden fold of her jerkin and drew out a smooth, river-worn stone the size of a hen's egg, gray-green and polished by years of current, and held it out to him on her open palm. "Then take this instead," she said, "and hear me, Mason, for I say this only once. My name is Dagna Rockhart. You have bought my debt, not my soul. I will work it off with my hands, and when it is paid, every coin, every scrap of what you spent and more, you will place this stone back into my palm with your own hand, and I will owe you nothing. That is the vow of my people. Break it, and no orc alive will ever trust a Brooks again. Keep it, and I will make you the finest blades this side of the mountains." Finn took the stone. It was warmer than it should have been, sun-heated from her skin, and heavier than its size suggested. "I keep my word," he said. Dagna Rockhart looked at him for a long moment, tusks catching the light, and something almost like the ghost of a smile touched the corner of her mouth. "We shall see, little Mason," she said. "We shall see." They walked out of the square together, the crowd parting around them with a mixture of scorn and fascination, Finn's father trailing behind muttering about ruin and disgrace, and neither of them yet knew how thoroughly that stone would come to define the rest of their lives. The Brooks yard sat at the edge of Thornwell's eastern district, hard against the town's outer wall, where the streets gave way to stacked stone and timber scaffolding and the smell of raw lime dust. It was not much, a modest house, a lean-to workshop, a strip of yard where Finn kept his tools, and the half-built foundation of the wall he was contracted to finish for Lord Vane before winter. His father's trade business occupied the front rooms of the house, bolts of cloth and barrels of salted fish destined for caravans heading east, a life Finn had walked away from 3 years earlier to the great and lasting disappointment of Bram Brooks. That disappointment had never been louder than it was that evening, as Bram paced the kitchen while Dagna stood in the yard beyond the window, arms crossed, watching the sunset paint the town wall gold. 15 stags, Bram said for perhaps the 10th time. Your land money, gone, for an orc. For a person, father. For a war prize who could snap your neck before you finish that sentence. Finn glanced out the window. Dagna had not moved to snap anyone's neck. She had instead found a discarded length of iron rod among his masonry offcuts and was turning it over in her hands with the absent, appraising touch of someone who could not help herself around good metal. "She won't hurt anyone," Finn said, with more confidence than he entirely felt. "You don't know that." "No," Finn admitted. "But I know what that whip looked like on her shoulder, and I know I couldn't stand there and watch it happen twice." Bram fell quiet at that, some old memory of his own crossing his weathered face, perhaps of a kinder, more foolish version of his son before 3 years of hauling stone had toughened him, and said only, "Your mother would have done the same thing. Fool woman, fool son." He left it at that and did not raise the matter again that night, though he did not sleep easy either, listening for trouble that never came. Finn found Dagna in the yard as full dark settled, sitting on an overturned barrel with the iron rod balanced across her knees. Up close, away from the crowd and the chains, he could see the details the auction block had hidden, the fine burn scars along her forearms that spoke of a lifetime at a forge, the intricate braid worked through her dark hair, the tired lines around her eyes that no amount of pride could fully mask. "You've a workshop," she said without looking up, "and no forge in it, a mason with no fire. Stone doesn't need fire, just patience and a good chisel." Patience. She said the word like she was testing its weight. "I have very little of that left, Mason. I have spent 3 weeks in chains being sold like a prize hog. Do not mistake my silence tonight for gratitude." "I wouldn't dream of it," Finn said, and something in his easy tone made her look up at last, sharp and surprised. "You made a vow in the square. I intend to hold you to it same as you'll hold me to mine. That's not gratitude between us, Dagna Rockhart. That's a bargain. I can build you a forge by week's end if you tell me what you need." For a long moment she only studied him, the iron rod still resting across her knees, and Finn had the distinct sense of being weighed on some scale far older and stranger than any market stall. "A bellows," she said finally. "Good coal, not the soft rubbish your smiths burn here. An anvil if this miserable town owns one worth the name." And she added, tossing the iron rod aside with a clatter, "A roof, Mason, because I do not intend to work in the rain like some drowned dog. I can manage all of that." "Then manage it," Dagna said, rising to her full towering height, "and I will show this town what an Ironback smith can do with her hands, and you will see your 15 stags return tenfold before the first snow falls." She paused at the door of the linta that would become her forge, silhouetted against the last light. "And Mason Finn Brooks, do not think to lock this door at night. I have worn enough chains for one lifetime." "I wasn't planning to," Finn said quietly, and meant it, and something about the plainness of the answer seemed to satisfy her more than any grand promise could have. The forge rose in 4 days, Finn working through the nights after his contracted wall work for Lord Vane was done, stacking stone and mortaring flue, and hauling a second-hand bellows. He traded 3 months' worth of future stonework to acquire from a retiring smith 2 streets over. Dagna worked beside him more often than not, her hands surprisingly deft at fitting stone despite their size, and though she complained constantly about the pace, the quality of the coal, the shape of the flue, the general incompetence of human masonry, Finn began to notice she never actually left his side to do it elsewhere. "You could simply tell me what you want and let me build it," he said one evening, sweat-soaked and sore, as she rearranged for the 3rd time a course of stones he had already laid twice. "And trust a mason to understand a forge's breath." Dagna snorted, though there was no real heat in it. "You'd have my fire smothered by midwinter." "You said yourself I build good walls." "Walls do not need to breathe. Fire does." She glanced sideways at him, a teasing glint entering her dark eyes that he was beginning to recognize and, if he was honest with himself, beginning to look forward to. "Unless you'd rather I simply forge in the open yard and let your neighbors watch an orc woman glow like a coal at midnight. I hear humans find that sort of thing unsettling." "I find it rather more concerning that you'll catch your death of cold before winter's out if you don't let me finish this roof." "Ah, concerned for me now, Mason." Someone has to be, Finn said, since you clearly aren't concerned for yourself. And she laughed a real laugh, sudden and startled out of her, low and rich, and Finn found he would have laid 100 more courses of stone just to hear it again. By the second week, the forge stood finished, and Dagna Rockhart's hammer began to ring out over the eastern district of Thornwell from dawn until well past dark. Word of an orc smith spread through the market quickly. As such things did, some came to gawk, some came to sneer, and a fair few, once they saw the blades she produced, came quietly back after dark to purchase what they would never admit to wanting in daylight. Her steel held an edge no human smith in 3 counties could match, folded and quenched with techniques passed down through Ironback smith mothers for 100 generations, and within a month, her first commissions had already begun to outpace the 15 stags Finn had spent. Not everyone in Thornwell welcomed it. A guild smith named Oswin Pratt, whose custom had thinned considerably since the ring of Dagna's hammer began carrying over the rooftops, took to muttering in the tavern about orc witchery and unnatural steel, and one evening he brought 3 of his apprentices to the Brooks yard with torches and loud, wine-soaked courage. "You'll close that forge, Mason," Pratt bellowed at the gate, "or we'll close it for you. This is a human town. We don't need monsters shaping our steel." Finn came out into the yard to find Dagna already standing in the forge doorway, arms crossed, utterly unbothered, the orange glow of her fire framing her like something out of an old ballad meant to frighten children. She could have crushed Pratt's skull with one hand, and everyone present knew it, which was precisely why Finn stepped between them anyway. Not because she needed shielding, but because he would be damned if he let her stand alone against a mob simply because his was the only human voice they might listen to. "This is my yard, Oswin," Finn said, "and my forge and my smith bought fair and square before witnesses in the very square you drink in every night. You've a complaint, take it to Lord Vane's steward. You don't bring torches to a man's home over jealousy of better steel." "Better steel," Pratt spat. "Orc steel." "It isn't natural." "It is exactly as natural," Dagna interrupted, stepping past Finn, not shoving him aside, but moving with a deliberate, unhurried confidence that made 3 drunk apprentices take an involuntary step back, "as your fear of a woman who outhammers you. Go home, little smith. Come back sober, and I will show you where you've been folding your steel wrong for 20 years, free of charge, since it seems no one else has had the courage to tell you." The apprentices laughed before they could stop themselves, and Pratt's face went purple, and the torches guttered out of the yard a few minutes later with considerably more muttering than menace left in them. When they were gone, Finn let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You didn't need me to stand in front of you," he said. "You could have handled him without lifting a finger." "I know," Dagna said, and there was something warmer in her voice than he had heard before. "I did not need you to. I wanted to see if you would anyway." She studied him in the dying torchlight, something considering in her gaze. "Not many men stand between an orc and a mob, Mason. Fewer still do it for a woman who does not need saving." "Maybe I just like proving people wrong," Finn said, though his pulse was doing something complicated in his chest. "Maybe," Dagna agreed, and reached out, unexpectedly, to brush a smear of soot from his cheekbone with one callous thumb, her touch far gentler than her hands looked capable of. "Or maybe you are simply a fool who cannot help himself, little Mason. Fortunate for you, I find I do not mind fools nearly so much as I once did." She turned and went back into the forge before he could answer, but Finn stood a long moment in the cooling yard, his cheek still warm where she had touched it, and understood with sudden, dizzying clarity that whatever this was becoming between them, it had stopped being merely a bargain some weeks ago, and he had simply been too busy laying stone to notice. The night the roof beam cracked came at the worst possible hour, deep into autumn, a storm howling in off the Greymental foothills and rattling every shutter in the eastern district. Finn had been reinforcing an old support along the forge's east wall when the timber, weakened by rot he hadn't caught in time, gave way above him without warning. He heard Dagna's shout before he registered the danger himself, and then her arm was across his chest, hauling him backward with a strength that lifted his feet clean off the ground. Half a heartbeat before 300 pounds of stone and timber crashed down exactly where he had been standing. They ended up in a tangle on the workshop floor, Dagna's arms still locked around him, both of them breathing hard, cold dust and splinters raining down around them in the lantern light. "You," Dagna said, once the dust settled and neither of them had moved, "are going to get yourself killed one day, Mason, standing under rotten beams like a man with no sense at all." "I was checking the joint," Finn managed. "I didn't think—" "No," she agreed, "you did not." But her arm did not loosen from around him, and when Finn turned his head, her face was very close, close enough that he could see the fine grain of her green-gray skin, the flecks of gold in her dark eyes reflecting the lantern flame, and neither of them seemed inclined to move. "Dagna," he started, unsure even what he meant to say next. "You spent everything you had on me," she said quietly, cutting across whatever half-formed sentence he'd been building. "A stranger, an orc, a woman who might have gutted you the moment your back was turned, and you did it because a whip crack offended you. I have met warlords with less courage than that, Finn Brooks." "It wasn't courage," Finn said. "It was just you didn't deserve it. Nobody deserves that." "Perhaps," Dagna said. "Or perhaps you are exactly as good a man as you seem, and I have simply never met one before." Her thumb traced along his jaw, slow and deliberate this time, no soot to excuse it. "That frightens me rather more than the beam did." "I'm not going anywhere," Finn said. "Storm or no storm, beam or no beam." "Good," Dagna murmured, "because I find, against every sense I possess, that I do not want you to." And then she kissed him, not gently, not tentatively, but with the same unhesitating confidence with which she did everything else, one broad hand curling into the front of his tunic to keep him exactly where she wanted him. And Finn kissed her back with everything 2 years of loneliness and quiet longing had built up in him, storm roaring outside. The ruined beam forgot entirely between them. When they finally broke apart, both a little breathless, Dagna rested her forehead briefly against his, an unexpectedly tender gesture from a woman built like a small mountain. "That changes nothing about the vow," she said, though her voice had lost its earlier edge entirely. "I will still work off every coin you spent." "I never doubted it," Finn said, smiling despite the ache in his ribs where he'd landed. "I just didn't expect the interest to come with a kiss." "Do not get used to it," Dagna warned, though she was smiling too, tusks and all, in the lantern light. "I am still deciding whether you are worth the trouble, little Mason." "Take your time," Finn said. "I'm not in any hurry." But they were both, in their own ways, already decided, and they both knew it, and neither said so aloud that night, content instead to sit together amid the wreckage of a broken roof beam until the storm passed, and the stars came out clean and cold over the Greymental Mountains. Winter eased its grip by the time the trouble finally came, 6 months after the auction, on a market day bright and busy with the first true warmth of spring. Dagna's reputation had grown far beyond Thornwell's walls. By then merchants rode in from Caldron's Reach and beyond to commission her blades, and even Lord Vane himself had quietly purchased a ceremonial sword from her forge, though he never admitted as much in public. Finn's stonework, too, had flourished. Men who once sneered at the fool who'd spent his land money on an orc now paid him handsomely to reinforce their cellars and rebuild their walls, half hoping some of the smith's luck might rub off through association. They were together at the market that morning, Dagna in a newly stitched set of fitted leathers Finn had commissioned from the town's best leatherworker. A snug smith's bodice reinforced at the shoulders, dyed a deep forest green, laced up the front and flattering every powerful line of her, haggling cheerfully over the price of coal with a merchant 3 times her size, when the horns sounded at the castle gate. Riders came through the crowd on lathered horses, a dozen armed men in mismatched mail bearing no lord's colors Finn recognized, led by a broad-shouldered captain with a scarred jaw and cold, professional eyes. Behind them rode a single orc, older, gray at the temples, dressed in rich furs entirely unlike anything Finn had seen an Ironback wear before. Dagna went very still beside him, the coal merchant forgotten entirely. "Threk," she said, so quietly only Finn heard it, and the word carried more venom than he had ever heard in her voice before. The old orc reined in before the market well, surveying the crowd with an ease that suggested he had done this sort of thing many times, and when his eyes found Dagna across the square, something like triumph flickered across his weathered face. "There," he called out, in accented but clear common tongue, pointing directly at her. "The escaped war prize. Dagna Rockhart, sold rightfully at auction to satisfy the debts of the Ironback raiding party. My men will take her now, and any human fool sheltering her may answer for harboring stolen property." The captain's men began to dismount, hands on hilts, and the crowd, Thornwell's crowd, always hungry for spectacle, pressed in closer rather than away, sensing something far more interesting than a cold dispute. Finn stepped forward without entirely deciding to, placing himself between Dagna and the approaching soldiers, heart hammering. She was bought fair before witnesses from Lord Vane's own auction block. I hold the dead stone myself. She's no one's stolen property. Threk's lip curled. A stone means nothing to human law, boy. An Ironback law does not recognize a slave's bargain with her purchaser. She belongs to the clan's judgment, and the clan has sent me to collect her. "The clan," Dagna said, stepping past Finn now, and there was something in the set of her shoulders, the sudden iron in her spine that made even Threk's horse shy back a step, "does not send its usurping steward to collect debts, cousin. It sends its Warqueen's own kin crawling to finish what he started when he sold his own blood to human slavers to steal a throne that was never his to take." The square went utterly silent. Even the coal merchant forgot his scales. "Warqueen," someone in the crowd repeated, disbelieving. Dagna turned, slowly, deliberately, to face the whole of the gathered market merchants, guildsmen, Lord Vane's own steward who had come running at the horn blast, Bram Brooks standing frozen near his cloth stall, and Finn, who stood closest of all and felt his heart climb into his throat at what he saw building in her face. "I am Dagna Rockhart," she said, her voice carrying like a hammerfall across the entire square, "daughter of Brenna Rockhart, last true Warqueen of the Ironback Clan hold, betrayed and sold into human chains by my own cousin Threk so that he might seize my mother's throne while I rotted in a market cage. I do not deny what I am. I have never denied it. Ask any smith what my blades are worth and you will have your answer." She turned then and looked directly at Finn, and what came out of her mouth next struck the square like a second horn blast, louder than the first. "And before every soul gathered here as witness," Dagna said, "I claim Finn Brooks, stonemason of this town, as my chosen consort, under the oldest law of my people, that a Warqueen returning to reclaim her hold does so with a chosen mate at her side, whose claim upon her cannot be broken by any steward, cousin, or usurper, upon pain of blood challenge before the whole clan hold." The square erupted. Finn felt every drop of blood drain from his face and then rush straight back up into it, utterly unprepared, utterly stunned, aware of 100 eyes swinging toward him at once. "Dagna," he started, but she did not so much as glance his way, her attention fixed entirely on Threk, whose composure had finally, satisfyingly cracked. "You cannot," Threk sputtered. "A human, clan law makes no exception for the species of a chosen consort, only for the sincerity of the claim," Dagna said, cold and merciless now, every inch the queen she had just declared herself to be. "You know the law better than most, cousin, seeing as you have spent 6 months hiding from it. Take me by force here, in front of this many human witnesses, and you will start a war between our peoples that even your treachery cannot survive. Or ride home and tell the Hearth Council that the Warqueen returns alive, with a claim no honest elder can deny." Threk's scarred captain looked between his employer and the crowd, calculating odds that had clearly shifted far beyond his payment's worth, and made a small, telling gesture to his men to hold. Threk himself sat rigid in his saddle for a long, furious moment before wheeling his horse around. "This is not finished, cousin," he snarled. "No," Dagna agreed, unbothered, "it is not. But it will be when I reach the Hearth Council myself, and you answer for selling your own blood to save your ambition." She watched him ride from the square with his men, jaw tight, and only once the last hoofbeat had faded did she finally turn back to Finn, who stood there still trying to remember how to breathe. "You could have warned me," he managed. "There was no time," Dagna said, and for just a moment beneath the Queen's iron composure, he caught the flicker of something uncertain, almost afraid, that he had never seen in her before. "And I was not entirely certain you would let me claim you at all." "You just declared me your consort in front of the entire market," Finn said, half laughing despite the absurdity, the danger, the 100 staring faces around them. "A little late to worry about my consent now, Dagna Rockhart." Something in her shoulders eased just slightly at the lack of anger in his voice. "Is that a yes, Mason?" Finn looked at her, this woman who had walked off a slave block with more dignity than most kings possessed, who had just risked a war rather than let her cousin drag her back to chains, who had chosen him, publicly, irrevocably, in front of everyone who had once laughed at the fool who'd spent his land money at auction, and found the answer had never really been in doubt. "It's a yes," he said. "It was always going to be a yes." The crowd, still buzzing with disbelief, parted around them as Dagna took his hand in front of everyone, and Bram Brooks, watching from beside his abandoned cloth stall, sat down rather heavily on an overturned crate and did not get up again for some time. They did not have long to enjoy the moment. Lord Vane's steward arrived within the hour demanding explanations, and by evening word had reached Lord Vane himself that a war prize sold at his own auction had turned out to be a deposed foreign queen who had just publicly claimed one of his townsmen. A diplomatic complication no lord of a border town wanted anywhere near his ledgers. Vane summoned them both to the castle gate the next morning, more anxious to wash his hands of the matter than to intervene in it. "I want no part of Orc succession disputes," Vane told them flatly, standing beneath the raised portcullis with his steward hovering nervously behind him. "You are, as of this morning, free to go wherever your business takes you, Warqueen Rockhart, and I will hear no complaint from your cousin about it, since I sold you fair and square, and what you do with your own freedom afterward is no concern of Thornwell's. But I'll not have armed riders crashing through my market square again. Settle your throne elsewhere." "Gladly," Dagna said, with the particular dryness Finn had come to adore. "Your hospitality has been memorable, my lord, if nothing else." They left the gate that same afternoon, gathering what supplies they could carry: Dagna's traveling hammer and a satchel of her finest tools, Finn's mason's chisels wrapped in oilcloth, whatever coin remained from 6 months of honest work, and set out on the mountain road toward the Greymental foothills before Threk could gather his nerve for a second attempt. Bram Brooks, to Finn's genuine surprise, met them at the eastern wall with a mule loaded with provisions. "I don't understand any of this," his father admitted gruffly, not quite meeting Finn's eyes. "Orc queens and blood challenges and consort claims. But your mother always said you had more heart than sense, and I suppose I'm finally starting to see what she meant by it." He pressed the mule's lead rope into Finn's hand. "Come back when it's settled, whatever it is, both of you." It took 3 days on the mountain road before the hunters found them. They came at dusk on the second evening past the tree line, 6 riders under Threk's scarred captain, having doubled back with fresh horses, and clearly no intention of waiting for any Hearth Council to rule against them. Finn heard the hoofbeats first, felt Dagna's hand close hard around his arm, and then they were running, scrambling off the road into a boulder-strewn gully as arrows hissed into the trees behind them. "Go," Dagna said, shoving him ahead of her toward a cluster of standing stones. I can hold them. I'm not leaving you to hold 6 armed men alone, Finn snapped back, and there was no time to argue further because the riders were already crashing through the underbrush, the captain's blade catching the last light as he bore down on them both. What happened next, Finn would turn over in his memory for years afterward, half in disbelief at his own actions. He had spent 3 years learning the exact weight and balance of stone, how a single well-placed strike could bring an unsteady wall down clean and controlled. The gully they'd fled into was lined with loose scree above a narrow choke point, and Finn, heart hammering, hands remembering their trade even as his mind screamed at him to run, drove his iron prybar into the base of an unstable boulder shelf, just as the lead riders funneled into the narrow passage below. The rockfall that followed was not large, but it was precisely placed, and it came down directly across the gully's mouth in a crash of dust and tumbling stone, spooking the horses into a screaming, rearing tangle that threw 2 riders clean from their saddles and blocked the remaining 4 behind an impassable wall of rubble. Dagna stared at him through the settling dust, then at the rockfall, then back at him, something between disbelief and fierce, delighted pride breaking across her face. "You brought down a mountainside on them," she said. "I redirected some loose scree," Finn corrected, still shaking, "very precisely using stonemason principles." "Mason principles," Dagna repeated, and laughed, a real laugh, bright and startled, even with the captain's furious shouting still muffled behind the rubble. "Remind me never to underestimate a man who spends his days moving mountains for a living." They did not linger to see how quickly the hunters cleared the rockfall. They ran, hand in hand, deeper into the foothills as darkness fell, and it was well past midnight, both of them exhausted and scraped raw from the flight, when they finally stopped in a hollow beneath an overhanging cliff to catch their breath. It was there in the dark, with the sound of the mountain wind moving through pine boughs and the distant possibility of pursuit still very real, that Dagna did something Finn had not expected. She drew the river stone from the pouch at her belt, the same stone she had pressed into his palm 6 months earlier on a slave block in Thornwell Square, and held it out to him, except this time her hand was not steady. "I release you from the vow," she said quietly. "Take the stone back yourself if you wish, or cast it into the river we'll cross tomorrow. I do not care which. You have more than repaid whatever coin you spent, Finn Brooks, tenfold and more, and I will not have you die on a mountainside for a debt that was settled months ago. Go back to Thornwell, live your life, I will finish this alone." Finn looked at the stone in her palm, warm from her skin the way it had been the very first time, and felt something in his chest settle rather than break. "No," he said. Dagna blinked. "No, you just released me from the vow," Finn said. "Fine, I heard you. But you never asked me to keep walking with you because of a debt, Dagna. I'm not doing this because I owe you anything." He closed her fingers back around the stone, gently, deliberately, his hands over hers in the dark. "I'm doing it because I love you, and I made a choice back in that square long before you ever claimed me in front of anyone, and no vow you release me from is going to change my mind about it. So keep your stone. Give it back to me when you actually want to, not because some old promise says you have to." For a long moment Dagna said nothing at all, and in the darkness Finn could not read her face, and he wondered, with a sudden lurch of fear, if he had somehow said entirely the wrong thing. Then she made a sound that was half a laugh and half something rower, and pulled him against her chest so suddenly he nearly lost his footing, one massive arm wrapping around him and holding him there as though she meant never to let go again. "You impossible man," she said into his hair, her voice thick in a way he had never heard from her before. "Do you understand what you are asking of me? To keep walking into danger with a mate who cannot swing a blade half as well as I can, simply because I want to and not because some old debt demands it?" "That's exactly what I'm asking," Finn said, muffled against her shoulder. "Good," Dagna said fiercely, "because I would have followed you back to Thornwell and dragged you along by your collar if you had tried to leave me out here alone, Mason, make no mistake about that." She drew back just enough to look at him, tucking the stone away again with hands that had steadied now, some fierce decision settled behind her eyes. "We finish this together, then, both of us, all the way to the Hearth Council." "Together," Finn agreed, and when she kissed him this time, in the cold mountain dark with hunters somewhere behind them and an entire clan hold still ahead, it tasted less like a stolen moment and more like a promise finally being made honestly, by two people who had chosen each other with nothing left hidden between them. They reached the Ironback stronghold 3 days later, climbing out of the tree line into a wide mountain valley, ringed by gray stone walls and watchtowers, forge smoke rising from 100 chimneys against the clear morning sky. Word of Dagna's return had somehow outrun even the hunters, perhaps a scout, perhaps simple mountain gossip carried faster than any horse, because a crowd had already gathered along the approach road by the time they reached the outer gate, orc faces young and old, warriors and smiths and elders alike, staring at the woman walking toward them with a human man at her side, and dust from 3 days of hard travel still on both their clothes. Threk stood at the gate itself, flanked by a dozen of his own household guard, his scarred captain notably absent. Finn suspected the man had reconsidered his fee after the rockfall and simply gone home. Behind Threk, seated on a carved stone bench beneath the gate arch in the manner of a formal proceeding hastily assembled, sat the Hearth Council 5 elder orcs, both men and women, wrapped in ceremonial furs despite the mild mountain air, their faces unreadable. "You dare return," Threk called out, though his voice lacked the confidence it had carried in Thornwell Square, with a human dragged along like some pet, "and expect the council to simply hand you back a throne you abandoned when you let yourself be sold like cattle." "I did not let myself be sold," Dagna said, stopping a dozen paces from the gate, Finn at her shoulder. "You drugged my wine at the Fen Hollow parley and delivered me bound into human hands while claiming a raid had taken me, cousin. Deny it before the council if you dare, but I have witnesses of my own now human witnesses, who saw the auction block itself, who can speak to how I came to be sold in the first place, and I do not think you want a human lord steward testifying to the Hearth Council about the coin you pocketed for the transaction." A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. One of the council elders, a thin, sharp-eyed woman with silver-streaked hair, leaned forward with sudden interest. "You have proof of this, Threk Ironback?" she asked, and the ice in her tone suggested she had suspected as much for some time already. Threk's composure cracked further, his hand drifting toward the hilt at his belt, and for one terrible moment Finn thought the confrontation would turn to blood right there at the gate. Then Dagna moved not toward Threk, but toward Finn, drawing him forward by the hand in front of the entire assembled clan hold and the watching council alike. "Before I answer any further challenge," she announced, her voice ringing clear across the valley, "I will finish what I began in a human market square 6 months ago, so that no elder here can claim I acted from desperation rather than choice." She turned to face Finn fully and drew the river stone from her belt once more, and this time her hands were perfectly steady. "Finn Brooks, you bought my debt when you owed me nothing, gave me your protection when you had no reason to trust an orc stranger, brought down a mountainside with your bare hands and a mason's bar to keep me safe, and stayed at my side even after I released you from every vow between us. I do not offer you this stone now to close a debt. I offer it as a claiming gift before my own people, that you might carry it as proof that the Warqueen of Ironback chose you freely, with her whole heart, and means to keep you at her side for the rest of both our lives, if you will have me." The valley had gone utterly silent, every eye fixed on the two of them at the gate. Finn took the stone from her palm, warm, familiar, the same stone that had passed between them at the very beginning of everything, and closed his hand around it. "I told you back on that mountain I wasn't going anywhere," he said, his voice carrying more steadily than he expected across the watching crowd. "I meant it then. I mean it more now. I'll have you, Dagna Rockhart, Queen, Smith, impossible, stubborn woman that you are, for as long as you'll keep me." Threk made a strangled sound of protest, but the silver-haired elder rose from the council bench with an air of finality that silenced him entirely. "The claiming is witnessed and lawful," she declared. "Threk Ironback, you will answer this council for the drugging and sale of your own kin, here, now, before judgment is passed on anything else." She turned her sharp gaze on Dagna. "Your throne was never truly forfeit, Warqueen. It was stolen. The council recognizes your return and your claim in full." What followed was not the bloodshed Finn had feared. Faced with witnesses, a hostile council, and a crowd that had already begun muttering ugly things about traitors who sold their own blood to human slavers, Threk's remaining nerve broke entirely. He was seized by his own household guard before he could so much as draw his blade, and led away to await formal judgment, sputtering protests that no one troubled themselves to listen to. The crowd's mood shifted almost instantly once the danger had passed, curiosity and cautious approval replacing tension, and Finn found himself the object of considerable orc scrutiny, some hostile, some merely startled, most simply fascinated by the sight of a human man standing at the gate of Ironback Hold with their returned queen's hand still in his. "They'll need time," Dagna murmured to him, watching her people watch him in turn. "Some may never fully accept it. My own people have as much reason to distrust yours as your people have to distrust mine." "I've got nowhere else I'd rather be," Finn said, "and no one else I'd rather have this argument with than you, for as long as it takes them to come around." Dagna smiled at that, the real smile, tusks and all, that he had come to treasure above almost anything else in his life. 3 days later, once Threk's judgment had been passed, exile rather than execution, a mercy Finn suspected only Dagna's intervention had secured, and the Hearth Council had formally restored her mother's throne into her hands. Dagna led Finn back to the great stone gate of Ironback Hold at dusk, the mountain sky burning orange and gold behind the peaks. The whole valley had gathered again, this time not for judgment but for something else entirely. Word had spread of what was to come, and even the most wary of her people had turned out to see it. She stopped him at the threshold of the gate itself, the ancient stone worn smooth by generations of Ironback smiths and warriors passing beneath it, and drew the river stone from where he had carried it these past days, pressing it now not into his hand, but into both of their joined palms together. "This stone began as a debt between strangers," Dagna said, loud enough for the gathered clan to hear, "and became a claim between a queen and the man she chose above every safer, easier path available to her. Let it end tonight, as a promise between equals that whatever comes, mountain or market square, human town or orc stronghold, we face it together, as we have since the day a fool of a mason outbid a lord for a slave he had no business buying." "I wasn't a fool," Finn said, smiling despite the tightness in his throat. "I just knew a queen when I saw one, chains or no chains." "Smooth-tongued mason," Dagna murmured, though her eyes had gone bright in the fading light. "Say the words properly, or the whole valley will think you unworthy of me." "Dagna Rockhart," Finn said, steadying himself, meeting her eyes fully in front of her entire watching clan, "I vow to stand at your side as your equal, your mate, and your husband if your people will allow it, to raise walls where you need shelter, to stand my ground where you need a shield, and to love you exactly as fiercely as you've loved me since a market square in Thornwell, for as long as we both shall live." "And I vow," Dagna answered, her voice thick but unwavering, "to forge for you blades no enemy can break, to defend what is mine with everything I possess, and to never again let any chain human or orc come between us. I am no longer anyone's slave, Finn Brooks. I am your wife if you will have that title from me, and you are my consort and my heart, and no council, no cousin, no crowd of frightened strangers will ever change that again." The crowd erupted not in protest, but in the rough, startled cheer of a people who had feared losing their queen entirely, and found instead that she had returned to them whole, fierce, and unmistakably happy, human husband and all. Finn kissed her there at the threshold of Ironback Hold, the ancient gate stone beneath their feet, the river stone still warm between their joined hands, the whole mountain valley bearing witness to a promise that had begun as a desperate bid at a slave auction, and ended as the truest vow either of them had ever made. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing against the cheering of the crowd, Dagna pressed her forehead to his exactly as she had done the night the roof beam nearly killed him, and murmured words meant only for him beneath the noise of celebration. "I could have chosen anyone, Mason," she said softly. "Warriors, chieftains, smiths finer than any in the mountains. I chose you from the moment you opened your fool mouth in that square. I would choose you again in every world there is." "Good," Finn said, holding her as tightly as his human arms could manage against her considerable strength, "because I'm not planning on being anywhere else, Dagna Rockhart. Not now. Not ever." They stayed at Ironback Hold through that first winter, and built a life neither of them could have imagined on the day of the auction. Dagna ruling her clan hold with the same fierce, unshakable confidence she brought to everything else, her forge still ringing out over the mountain valley each morning. Finn raising new walls and reinforcing old ones throughout the stronghold, teaching Ironback stoneworkers techniques from the human lowlands even as he learned mountain masonry in turn, the two traditions slowly, stubbornly beginning to merge the way the two of them had. Bram Brooks visited that spring, gruff and awkward among towering orcs at first, and left 3 weeks later promising to send trade caravans up the mountain road twice a year, muttering something about grandchildren that made Dagna laugh so hard she nearly dropped the sword she was quenching. The river stone itself found a permanent place above the hearth in the home they built together near the great gate, no longer a debt token nor even quite a claiming gift, but simply a reminder, warm gray-green stone catching the firelight each evening, of a promise made between two strangers who had somehow, against every prejudice their peoples carried, against every danger that had chased them across 3 days of mountain road, become everything to each other. And though hunters and cousins and cruel lords had once stood between them, none of it mattered anymore, because whatever the world sent their way after that, and the mountains, being mountains, would surely send plenty. Finn Brooks and Dagna Rockhart faced it together, exactly as they had vowed at the threshold of her reclaimed home, with nothing left unsaid between them and no chain strong enough to ever pull them apart again.